Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I've got a lovely lady for you. You've met her before with her mum Anne. Today, we're doing a solo episode. Great to have them on the show, Amanda. Sorry for my technical mistake, switching the computer off, switching the wrong plug off it. So, thank you for your patience.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed having conversation with you and my mom the last time we were together, and I look forward to chatting again.
Yeah, brilliant. So today's episode is a little bit different. We're going to be looking at the issue of bullying, and we're going to be looking at so this is fairly and squarely for you adoptive parents listening who were perhaps worried about your kids being bullied, being cyberbullied, and the impact that may have on them in terms of their self-esteem. So I think as a lot of us adoptees who are perhaps a little bit more sensitive, I'm talking for myself here. Amanda's an adoptee. She's also a birth mother. She's an educator as well. So you teach middle school, if I remember right.
Fifth grade.
Fifth graders.
Yep, 10 and 11-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's always an adventure.
It's always an adventure.
Yeah.
So could you translate that to me in age for an English guy, because our system's slightly different here. So these
right.
10?
So ours, they're 10 and 11-year-old kids. And in some certain states, fifth grade is middle school. In my state or in my area, it's still elementary. So our elementary goes till the 6th grade. So until kids are 12 in this area, but it just depends on the district. But my students are 10 and 11.
Right.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So here in the UK, kids go to what you call elementary, we call primary, and they leave elementary they leave primary at 11, and they go to secondary school or high school, big school after that. So yeah, so something that this is clearly, you know, when we were talking about this issue, you're kind of like your ears pricked up around bullying. Why was that, Amanda?
I think being, like you said, an educator, but also a parent myself. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. I think my tendency is to be a little bit on high alert to make sure that all of my kids, both my students, who I call my kids, and then my own children, are feeling safe where they are, and that I unfortunately and fortunately get to sort of have that bird's eye view of bullying happening, whether it's a very subtle type of bullying or a very overt type of bullying in the school where I work. And I've been working really hard to incorporate character building and lessons on integrity and doing the right thing because it's what is right and not easy. And I think one of the things I've learned over my time as an educator, which is now 14 years, I came to the profession a little bit later, is that we all know what to say. Even adults, we know what to say and what we need to do. But when we're in that moment, it's not always what comes naturally. And I think I'm really working hard to instill that school is not just a place to learn our academics, but it's also how to be a good person and interact with people and live your life to the fullest while also spreading kindness and not choosing to go down paths that may be the easiest path in the moment, but aren't showing your best character.
Yeah.
And I think as an adoptee, I felt very often different, but not because it was noted in my family as being a difference. I think we always celebrated being adopted in my family, but it's very easy for kids to make people who are adopted feel other without realizing it. So little comments that I remember from grade school, and maybe you've had similar situations where if somebody was acting out of character or different from the rest of the class, sometimes the comment was, well, you must be adopted. Or that was kind of used as a slam against people, or, well, you're probably adopted in your family since you're the only one who does this. And I think things like that always stuck with me because I was adopted, and kids saying that don't realize the ramifications of their words and how somebody who maybe already feels vulnerable or struggle with their worth because they don't know their adoption story, possibly, that just resonates even harder, and that feeling of maybe I really am worthless, even though that's never been demonstrated in my home. I mean, my family is amazing, and you've met my mom, that they're just incredible people, but it doesn't change how you feel knowing that someone held you or carried you and placed you until you know better the story that you come from, or understand as more of an adult why situations like that occur. As a little kid, you don't understand why someone might have to place a child. I sure didn't myself until I was put into a situation where it was the safest option for my birth daughter, who's now 23. But still something that I didn't really realize what goes into being a birth parent, and that that's another situation in which bullying can occur too. I think it's in all facets of life, there are instances of bullying, but I think being an adoptee can make it a little more raw, I guess. And on the flip side, as an educator early in my career, I noticed this trend, which I've not seen it as much, but when we would have meetings about students who are struggling, whether it was behaviorally or academically, one of the first questions that people would ask is, oh, are they adopted? And I finally at a point got to a level of comfort in my, not being a new teacher anymore, to say, why is that your first question? And somebody said, well, kids who are adopted tend to struggle more. And I said, well, that's very assumptive because I'm adopted. And then you could see this sort of panic of, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I said, but it's okay, but we have to actually look at why you're choosing to use that verbiage and why that's your first go-to. Because it makes the assumption that all kids who are adopted are not in a stable situation, or are going to have reactive attachment disorder, or are going to have these behavioral issues, which has nothing to do with being adopted at times. There are plenty of children who are in families that are biologically part of that family who struggle with those same mental health situations or struggle with academic problems. And I think that has sort of gone away, at least from what I see. And I think it helped at the time that my new administrator was also adopted, and he kind of put the kibosh on it, which I appreciated, and said, you guys, that's really unfair. That's really unfair to say that that's what you think may be at the root of all of these problems, because it insinuates that being adopted is problematic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what's made me more sensitive to it over the years. I think just naturally children struggle with self-esteem to some degree, because it's not inherent, and you sometimes expect the outside world to help build that up, but it doesn't always come to fruition. I feel like I try to support my own children, and they have their own insecurities too. It's just part of being in life and recognizing how we build our own insecurities in a positive way and use them possibly. But I think with those insecurities, I was always maybe a little more vulnerable to what people said. And so for me, things that I have told my own students, this, just sharing the power of words, that there were things that kids said to me when I was in now 6th grade or 5th grade 30 years ago that still stick with me, and still, sort of ended up navigating my path a little bit. Comments about the way my body looked, and that was something that stuck with me, and to a level that probably it shouldn't have, but it did, because I think combined with comments that kids are making when you're 10 and 11 and 12 about your changing body already is hard, but then you compound it with that feeling of like, well, now they think I'm worthless. And so that was something that I struggled with growing up, again, at no fault of a family, but just my internal workings. I don't know if you've had anything, I've talked a lot here. I don't know if you've had anything like that, Simon, where being adopted made you a little more vulnerable to those sorts of instances.
Well, I wouldn't know, because I'm not inside anybody else's head.
True.
Or heart. I think for me, it's having done a lot of work in primary schools over here, and you know, in a couple of months, I'm coming over to the States to do some work in South Carolina in some elementary schools and some a children's home. What bullies, or people who are bullying others, you know, if we label them as bullies, then are we othering them as well? Are we, you know, like some people might be concerned about that, right? So that's quite soft of me to say that. That's quite liberal of me to say it. I would normally say bullies. I would just normally go for it, you know, like, but they make it about us. They bullying comments or statements are often about what makes us different. Mm. So, you know, you've related two things about body shape and about being adopted, right? I got bullied for being different well, to do with my body, but in specifically my teeth. So my teeth stuck out, right? So I got called names for having ratty boy and rodent boy and different things, for having teeth that stuck out. I got bullied for living in a more affluent part of town, you know, and going to a different school. I got bullied on scout camp for not being a very good scout. You know, the bullies will pick on what makes other people different. So, you know, like people get bullied for having red hair or glasses. Right, I'm wearing glasses now doing this podcast, but you know, I've only wore glasses for the last 10 years. But kids get bullied for being, you know, having specky 4 eyes, and they get this name calling, and then you can often get into that whole rigmarole, is where is the line, you know, what's bullying or what's name calling, and you know, it does. So I think the essential thing for me is that bullies make it about us when it's about them. That they're playing out their own insecurities, making themselves feel bigger at our expense in a massive overgeneralization. And what I found that is, if the kids that we're talking to can see that for themselves, that it's about a problem, it's the bully's problem, not theirs, then that takes a whole load of weight off their shoulders. That's kind of the key thing here for me. And then the next question that often always comes into any conversation like this about, you know, strategies or, you know, parenting is from us, well, how do you do that? And there isn't a silver bullet for that one, because kids learn stuff in different ways. But maybe you can take well, first off, do you kind of is that significant? Does this seem kind of like on point for you?
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the things conversationally, excuse me, that we've had with students, and now as my kids are getting older with my own children, is that we first of all can't throw around the word bully. You need to really make sure you're being careful. Even this Christmas, we were with our families, and one of our nieces, who's quite a bit older than my kids, was playing with them and just joking around, and my daughter kept asking her to write something down on this game that they were playing, and she said, she keeps bullying me, Aunt Amanda. She keeps telling me that I have to write something down. And I said, okay, let's be careful how we're using that word, because I also don't want that to become common language for my kids, that anytime somebody's asking you to do something or doing something you don't like, that now they're a bully. And I think it is important to do that reflective piece of why is somebody saying what they're saying. So if one of my students is encountering a situation where they feel bullied, we always sit down and have a conversation. So talk to me about what's going on. How are you feeling? What's happening? Give me kind of the lowdown of what's going on. And then part of what I'll do with them is to say, so what do you think that other person is thinking? Like, why do you think they've chosen to say these things? And if their answer is just, well, they're being mean, we'll try to investigate a little bit further. So what is it, something that maybe they're uncomfortable with the fact that you're able to do something that they can't? Is it that they are maybe jealous of, an opportunity you have that they don't have, or that they're uncomfortable in some ways? So to try and do that reflective piece of why might somebody be acting the way they are, instead of assuming that they're just doing it to be mean, because I don't think anybody truly at the heart of them is a mean, horrible person. I think that experiences shape what you're capable of doing. And obviously some of your family, the family that you've grown up in and how they handle problems or situations will somewhat leach onto you. But I think same with adults. I mean, we live in a society where we tell kids not to bully, but then you look at social media and it's thriving with situations where people are just not able to hold back from saying something nasty just for the sake of saying it. And I know we've heard of, keyboard warriors or whatever the phrase is, that it's much easier to kind of be nasty behind a computer screen. But I think sometimes it's just that moment of stopping and thinking, like, is it necessary for me to say what I'm saying? What do I gain from saying this to a complete stranger about something? Is it that I get validated because I think I'm being funny, or whatever the case may be? I think that reflection piece is very important, of looking at why am I putting myself into this position of thinking I'm better or smarter or whatever the case may be, and trying to determine if it's that necessary piece to add in. I think there's I'm struggling for the word today. An acronym, the word think, and it's laying that out. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And if it's none of those things, then use that moment to think about why you need to say it. And I think that's something that adults and kids need to take a little more time to do. And we talk about, in class, we just finished reading the book Wonder, which is obviously a lovely book. We talked a little, you and I, about how many beautiful themes are in that story. And when we had these wonderful conversations, these 10 and 11-year-olds coming up with some just great insights about why kids are doing what they're doing in that story, around this, student who has this facial deformity, but is just such a lovable character too, that they knew what to say. They knew the right things to say. And then we talked about, well, so when we know the right thing to do, we're looking at this book and we're so frustrated with these characters that are treating him poorly. Why is it so hard for us to do that in our own lives? To stop and say, that's okay that they're different. Our differences are what make us us, and to celebrate it. And sometimes we need to stop and look and see, are we the character like Julian, who is uncomfortable with the situation at hand and don't know how to handle it without going to a place of making that other person belittled or whatever the case may be? And it got very quiet in my classroom, and we all kind of just sat for a minute. And then we did a little journaling activity around, have we ever been a Julian? Have we been in a situation where we put others down knowingly over something they can't control because it was just easier? And I think that there's a lot of power in asking kids to do that work, because I think sometimes we assume they can't do that sort of reflective work of recognizing where maybe they have been human. And we talked about that's very human. it's normal if you see somebody who looks different from you, it's okay to stop and take a minute and go, oh, they look a little bit different. I said, but then it's what you do next. It's okay to recognize the differences because that's human nature. Yeah. But it's choosing what happens next. And you write your own, you write the dialogue in your head of how you're going to behave. Because I also don't want kids to feel bad when they have a reaction to something different. Because I mean, it is human to take note of something that's different than you. Yeah. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to stop that either. That there is a normal reaction to things in life. But it takes concerted effort to decide, is your reaction going to allow you to learn from this situation and be open and accepting and try to meet new people, or is it going to stop you and hinder any sort of progress or growth in you?
Yeah. I'm going to sum up the first part of what you just said, I think, in one sentence, in case that because it was something that came to my mind in terms of simplifying it down. And I love your think. What do they call those?
Acronym.
Acronym. Yeah.
My brain's not pumping.
Yeah. We're recording this between Christmas and New Year, listeners. So yeah, I haven't been working for the last week or so. So yeah, I'm a bit rusty too. But yeah, the acronym is beautiful, and I think for me it's what's the emotion behind the behavior. Mm-hmm. What's the feeling that's driving the doing?
Yes.
And that's the ultimate question. Well, it's not the ultimate question, it's the first question, I guess. And then what's and it's hard, that self perception piece, that self-awareness piece is kind of the key, and it's very hard to see. This is one of my favorite statements from one of my favorite mentors. He says, a guy called Christian Simpson, he says, it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame. Mm-hmm. And although it's hard, that's where the juice is. That's where the change happens, where we see stuff for ourselves, about ourselves, and we look at, okay, so what feeling was driving what I did in that situation. So one of the things that I've heard from another great mentor of mine is that there's some gender differences there. So she sums this up in a couple of words. Women cry and men fight. We go, like, if you kind of need to be aware that when blokes are getting aggressive, it's often a cover up for being scared, mm-hmm. right? And so being aware of gender, and that's obviously a massive gender stereotype here, but sure. we can only talk in those terms. So, but I think that leads to some, not being aware of that leads to misunderstandings. So I'm thinking now about me and a certain friend of mine, and his view of what's funny is actually kind of bullying behavior. There's a very fine line. What we think is taking the mickey is actually can be quite triggering and harmful. So there's some different people have a different take on where the line between humor and attack. We've all got a slightly different take on that.
Absolutely.
And you know, like, and I'm thinking about myself here, in terms of, I used to have a publishing business with 5 or 6 staff, and I would be, you know, I wasn't the greatest of leaders, right? So sometimes I would flip my lid, and I just wanted the stuff done. And you know, there's a time for debating stuff, and then there's a time for action and direct action, and everybody's got a different take on that as well. So I could have been quite easily, you know, I've tried to set out a story, a rationale for something that needs to happen when I'm away on holiday. I can remember a specific view on this, and like I'd been giving it weeks and months of thought, and this needed doing, and the person I was talking to was kind of questioning it, and I'm just like, just do it, you know, like I've thought this all the way through. I'm going on holiday tomorrow. I've got a load of stuff to,
right.
You know, it's a very fine line. There's loads of fine lines and differences between here, between different people, and I think everything like this starts with our own self-awareness that we may be different. Our view is different to other people's view, and that might be for a whole load of circumstances. So that might be to do with how we were, as you say, how we were brought up, the stuff that went through our heads as we were growing up, and different triggers. You know, different people are triggered by different stuff. But yeah, the whole thing is about self-awareness, and we have to be able to see that for ourselves to be able to teach it to our kids. So yeah, it's like everything. It's the common mantra on a lot of the episodes of this podcast. It starts with us. It's not about our partners. It's not about our spouses. It's not about our kids. It starts with us and our own kind of self-reflection and our own ability to gauge where we are emotionally, to gauge where other people are emotionally.
And that's going to change through life. I mean, I think as you were talking about, and it's sort of a combination of some of the things you said. You mentioned how your mentor talks about how you can't see the picture clearly when you're in the frame. And it just kind of triggered a memory in my brain of being in high school and seeing a friend of mine being in a situation in a relationship that I thought was fairly unhealthy. And I remember saying to her, I'm just worried about you. I mean, we're only teenagers. Like, you shouldn't feel this way. You know, he is obviously on a different playing field than what you want, and you're not being treated the way I think you should be treated as a person. And back at that time, she was very upset because I was, talking about her relationship. And it came to be later on that she said, it wasn't healthy, which was interesting because I could see it in her. But then I went off into college and found myself into a relationship that was not healthy. I was looking for someone to, love me and be in that sort of a relationship. And I thought I had found him. And this is, back, I'm 20 years old, 19, 20 years old. And I had not really been in any relationship at that point. So I didn't know any better because I thought this is just how it is. But it just strikes me as odd because I could see it when I was not in that picture for my friend. But then when I was in my own picture, I couldn't see it for myself. I couldn't see where I was saying to her, like, you have to be stronger. You have to say this is not okay. But then when I found myself in that same situation, I was not able to really see it because I was so clouded by the graphics around me in my picture to not be able to step back and say, that's a lot fuzzier than it should be.
Yeah.
And I think and like you said, you have to come to that point, because when all of my spectators to our picture were looking at it saying, I'm not sure about this, or, my parents were a little bit concerned, and you don't understand. I know what's best. I know that this is going to be okay. We're okay. He's going to be okay. And it was not healthy. It was not safe. Part of it is just figuring it out on your own. And I remember very clearly the moment that I realized it, where I said to myself, this is not okay. I can't sustain this. And finally the picture became clear and I stepped outside of it. And then I could see it for what it was. But it is that idea of, it has to come from the worth that you feel. And it was a moment I felt the snap of, I remember looking at him and saying, I will not survive this if I do not step out. And I need I need to be in a place where I can be strong for not only me, but my birth daughter. And it just was not working, and not to go into detail about it, but it just was not the right situation. But I couldn't see it until I had this baby inside of me saying, you're not the only one here. You need to get some new lenses and see this picture for what it is.
Yeah. Perspective's one of my favorite words.
Yes.
And I'm just going to jump in with something really practical in case this is getting too theoretical for the listeners. So do it. If you're interested in this emotional intelligence stuff, we've only got so much time on this podcast today, and there's only so much we can cover. If you're interested in emotional intelligence, and buy a book on emotional intelligence. Go on Amazon, buy a book. Go put if audio you're listening to this, so podcasts are your thing. Listening is your thing. Put in emotional intelligence into your podcast search, or what I found really useful is those kind of like the emotional intelligence quizzes.
Mm-hmm.
So put in emotional intelligence quiz, and Google the have a look through the results, and find one that you think kind of emotional intelligence for dads, emotional intelligence for moms, emotional intelligence for parents, emotional intelligence, whatever it is, put something in, and do the quiz. And it'll give you a feel on where you're at. So that's a practical thing, and because we need that perspective. So other ways of getting perspective for me are, here's a good one. Start of lockdown. So 2 years ago, I was having I had a little bit of a meltdown in the kitchen. So my wife's on one part in the corner of the kitchen, watching our Prime Minister at the time talking some gobbledygook rubbish about COVID that he had no idea of whatsoever. I'm listening to him and I'm getting very frustrated because at what he's saying, which is absolute gibberish, because he didn't have a clue what he was talking about in those days. And also I'm trying to concentrate on something. I've got a really mind-numbingly complex task that I've got to be like, it's 5 hours work and I'm trying to do it on my computer. And I had a complete flip out, right? I lost all emotional intelligence in that moment. So what did I do? I went out and took the dog for a walk. And then I came back and apologized to my wife. And halfway round the hour-long circuit with the dog, I'd realized I'd had a shift in my perspective. Okay, I need to work in the spare bedroom, and by the time, as I was walking, listening to a podcast, I also went on Amazon, ordered the cheapest desk that I could find, and it arrived the following day, and the perspective helped me, give space to my wife and me stop being frustrated by a thing. So so whatever works for you in terms of perspective shifts, listeners, I would say that's the thing, and the solution The solution comes when we've stepped away from the problem, not when we're in the middle. What we're in the middle of it, and that's very important for us. You know, going back to a point you made right at the start, we know what to say. We know what to say when we're at the when we're at the victim end of the bullying behavior. And I'm only using this stuff for shorthand, right, listeners? So we know what to say, but we don't do it because we're our fight or flight amygdala or whatever the stuff is being triggered. We're scared. We don't know what to do. When the brain has reset, and then the answers become clear. And the brain reset is essentially, what did you I love the way you used it. You talked about being caught up in the screen, didn't you? What was the way? How did you describe it? You said you caught up in the moment.
Caught up in the moment of the situation. Yeah, I don't know the exact words I use, but you are, I mean, when you're in it, you get caught up in the people around you and how they're being, how they handle things, kind of that domino effect. Instead of just sometimes standing tall, it's easier to join the crowd because it's just easier. And that's where I think we keep coming back to that idea of integrity, that you do what's right because it's right. And not because you'll be getting any glory for it, or not with the expectation that you're going to be rewarded for it by somebody, some exterior thing, but implicitly you should feel this want or need to help people around you. But that sometimes is overshadowed by wanting to also feel accepted by the people around you. So, when I see a kid trying to stand up for another kid, if they try it once and it doesn't quite work, it's easier than to fall in with the row of dominoes, to then just be with the people around you and do what they're doing because you've already tried. And it's hard. That's really hard for kids to do that. And I think, for parents, I think one of the things, whether your child's adopted or not, I think having the ability to look through other lenses, whether it's through reading various books. I know I just finished a book by Ross Green, excuse me, about parenting, that it was Raising Human Beings, it's called. That was very interesting. I don't know that I would totally subscribe to that approach completely, but there are a lot of things that I could take from it that I think help when you are listening to your children. If they are coming home and they're describing a situation they've been in or something that a friend has been in. This happened this weekend with my daughter, witnessed something that a friend was doing. And we talked through it. And she said, I just didn't like how it made me feel. I don't even know how it would make her feel. That this little girl was saying something that wasn't very kind. And from a 6-year-old, I was like, well, I love that you're thinking about, how another person feels. That's really important because we aren't the only people here. We have to think beyond ourselves. But I think being able to stop and really listen to your kids, which is what Ross Green asks you to do. He says, don't try to solve the problem right away. Listen and then repeat their question or repeat kind of what they've said, so that first of all, you're validating that you're listening to your child or student or whomever or an adult. Sometimes you need to, I think we go into as adults, this like, let me fix it for you. Let me help you. And I think the best thing we can do for kids is to listen and help them know how to help themselves and how to work through those things so that they feel confident and they feel that worth and they feel that ability to hit these problems head on without an adult guiding them all the time. It takes time. It'll develop, it's not obviously going to be one conversation and they know how to do it. But I think sitting down and really listening and validating that they're having certain feelings. I think it's very, even in movies, you see parents, oh, you'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. But maybe it won't be for that kid. And so to listen and just say, well, tell me more about that. Like, what else are you feeling? And realizing that a lot of those feelings maybe aren't what the kids can express. It isn't exactly what the feeling is. They feel mad, but maybe it really isn't mad. Maybe it's disappointment. They don't have the language yet to know, even at 10 and 11. They don't know all the different facets of angry, and so I think helping them sort of pinpoint without telling them, I think what you're feeling is this, but to let them discover it. And especially around adoption, if as somebody who's not adopted, can't fully know the scope of the kind of complexity of feelings that go along with being adopted, regardless if it was a really positive adoption. I think that just listening and saying, I can imagine that's hard for you. I have not been there, but I can imagine that is hard. Or, not knowing. And I think it's little things that people don't realize, especially if I can bring it back to adoption. A friend of mine was making a comment about how she just is so interesting to her how much she's looking like her mom as she ages, or noticing that her hands are starting to look like her mom's hands. We don't always have that. You have a picture in your head of what your biological family looks like. And if you have the opportunity to meet them, which I've met some of my biological family, that can either be like, oh yes, that is where I get my nose, or that is where I have my hips from, or whatever the case may be. But if you don't have that opportunity, you don't know. And so there's again that moment of like, yeah, I don't know. And so finally, I think just being able to say that has to be hard for you. And I don't know what it feels like to not be able to look at someone in my family and go, I look like that person. Yeah. Little things like that. I don't, and I think it was interesting. I had the opportunity to meet with some biological family and see pictures of them when they were younger, and to finally see myself in someone was so powerful. And when I was relaying it to one of my best friends, I said, like, I looked at the picture and it was me. I've never had that, even though I look a lot like my adoptive parents, weirdly enough. But I said, I've never had an instance where I was like, that is my face on someone else in, the 1980s. But my friend, she kind of got really emotional, and she said, I never realized that part of being adopted. She's like, I guess I never really thought about that you just don't have anybody you can look at and say, that is who I look like, yeah, or where I come from. And so I think just recognizing that those are things that kids are maybe struggling with and don't even realize they're struggling with it, and to be mindful of it, or even have discussions. I come from a place with my kids that I guess I really like to have conversations and know that they're in a safe place to ask me any question about anything, and that I may not always know the answer, but I will always listen. And I think that as a practical point, I think hearing kids with bullying and not going right to the principal and not going right to the teacher, but sitting down with your kid and really talking through it, because kids also see things through their lenses. They don't always remember that they maybe had a little part in what was going on either. I think they tend to feel the victim part of it, but maybe don't always realize that maybe something they did prompted some of the behaviors, or the interchange between the two kids maybe blew things up to a level that wasn't acceptable. But I don't know. I think recognizing accountability and expecting accountability, but also validating kids' feelings and letting them talk through it, because I know my mom always was willing to do that, and my dad, and it helped me sort of process through some of the things that I was dealing with. And of course, as every teenager probably does, I'm sure I said, well, you don't understand whether you're adopted or not. But the fact that I had a place that I could say it, yeah, was huge.
Big stuff. So I'm conscious of time. So I've got an event coming up, and there's a link to in the show notes. If it's at the start of February 2023. So in the show notes, you will either find, listener, a link to the event so you can register for the event, or you will find a link to the you will find, depending on when you're looking at it, you will find a link to the recording of the event, because this is we're going to dive deeper into this subject, and I'm going to be sharing more about what I've learned. And I think for me, just to sum up where it is, it's that we've been looking at the connection between what we do and how we feel, and then there's the next connection is the link between how we feel and why we're feeling that way, the thought behind the feeling. And then upstream of that, you've used the word worth and self-esteem. The ultimate source, I think, of how we are in the world is our sense of self-esteem, our sense of self-worth. So that's where everything starts. That's the ultimate leverage. That's the ultimate leverage. How we see ourselves, drives our self-talk. What we say what do we say to ourselves about ourselves? What we say to ourselves about other people, and how we feel moment to moment, and what we do moment to moment. So for me, that self-esteem piece, self-identity piece is the ultimate. It is the ultimate leverage, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the webinar. So
I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, so my self-talk right now, to give you an example, is trying to pull me into criticizing myself for not knowing the exact date of the event. Right. It's early February 2023. So this is what it means for me in that moment, but it's not pulling me for some reason. I'm in a good space at the moment. Also, when I switched I was trying to switch the heater off, listeners, before I started the recording, and instead I turned the computer off. Right, and I noticed that, because this stuff fascinates me. I noticed that probably me a few years ago would have been giving myself a really hard time about that. And instead, I'm in a slightly better space, and I just emailed him and I said, sorry, silly me, silly mistake. I've turned the computer off. Stand by, we'll jump down back in. And that's that piece in that moment makes me feel a lot better. But stuff still, this idea of once and done and peaceful forever is obviously complete baloney. But but those little moments, those are little moments for me to savor when I'm not beating myself up for that.
But I think that's important too, to note your own growth. I think that's something to, even with kids, to say, hey, I'm so proud. Like, think about how you would have handled this a month ago, and think about how much you've grown as a friend. You're not letting this get you too upset. You're handling it much calmer, and I think being able to celebrate those little victories is really important, because that will perpetuate the work that we do to continue that sort of reflective piece and minding the way we handle things.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, the thing comes up to me. It's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame, either when we're when we're beating ourselves up or congratulating ourselves. It works both ways. So thank you for joining us today, Amanda, and thank you for listening, listeners. Hopefully you've enjoyed a slightly different take on this topic, and I look forward to seeing you on the event or hearing your feedback on the webinar when we put the recording up. So thanks a lot, listeners.